What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, and we are back. It is week 1 of the NFL regular season here in 2022, and we're getting ready for the very first Sunday main slate on the calendar. Now, you see on the board here, Kyler Murray is one of our favorite plays on this slate. If you go over to our website, occupyfantasy.com, you will see that he is the number 1 quarterback in the Occupy Fantasy model for this week's action. When we get into the bye weeks, the slates will be a little tighter, so they'll be a little easier to navigate than they are this week, which is often one of the hardest weeks to play NFL DFS. We're flying pretty blind. We don't have a lot of data we really don't have any data that we can go off of for how these coaches want to use their players in this new season. So we're basing a lot of our decisions as players, as content providers, based off of things that we've seen in prior years, news items that we've read over the summer throughout training camp and preseason, and just doing the best we can to make some educated guesses about the best way to build lineups to begin the season. There are some tried and true methods that we can stick to that help us build profitable lineups week in and week out. And thankfully for you, we've distilled everything that we've learned over the years playing these games in a free strategy guide over at occupyfantasy.com. It is our NFL DFS strategy guide over on the website. And this is the first thing I would recommend going through, whether you're a new DFS player, whether you've been playing DFS for a while. This can help you really reorient yourself and get ready for the 2022 NFL season. I want to talk a little bit about how to approach different contest types because we have it broken down in a pretty succinct way here in the strategy guide. In low-risk contests, we want to maximize the floor of production that we expect from the players in our lineups. We want to maximize the touches that we're going to have from every single player that we're deploying in a low-risk contest in DFS. So that means we want running backs that are going to get a lot of carries. Hopefully we'll also get a lot of targets. And we want receivers that are going to be very involved in the passing game in their offenses. That includes tight ends, of course, most weeks. In low-risk contests, you typically want to play 3 running backs. So that means you want to play a running back at your flex position, especially in these types of contests. There will be exceptions to this. There will be spots when injuries open up some opportunity in one particular wide receiver room with a team, and we'll be able to play a couple of cheap guys and pay up in other spots. So we'll talk about that throughout the season, but just understand, week in and week out, we want to play 3 running backs in low-risk lineups in NFL DFS. One of the other things that we've learned over the years is you want to make sure that your cumulative projected ownership in a low-risk lineup is over 90%. Hopping over to the Occupy model, which is already live on the website for week 1's action, we have ownership projections for every player on the main slate. We think Kyler Murray, the number 1 quarterback that we're interested in, is going to be about 10% on DraftKings, about 12% on FanDuel, for example. And if you're using our lineup builder will track the cumulative ownership in all of your lineups that you build using the lineup builder. That is just another reason to consider using the lineup builder that we provide here for you. Now, high-risk contests are a bit of a different animal in NFL DFS. While we're not necessarily trying to force stacks in low-risk contests, we're okay with playing some quarterbacks that have rushing upside alone, especially. This week a guy like Kyler, a guy like Lamar Jackson, a guy like Jalen Hurts, even Trey Lance by themselves would probably be okay in cash. In a high-risk lineup contest environment, you absolutely want to stack a QB with at least one of his teammates. Now, we have found that by far in these large high-risk contests, the most profitable type of lineup that you can use is what we call a 3x1 lineup. That'd be a quarterback with 2 of his pass catcher teammates and 1 of the opponents coming back in that lineup. So, for example, in this particular week, if we wanted to play Kyler Murray, that means we're focusing on the Arizona Cardinals and the Kansas City Chiefs game. This game is probably going to be very popular. Kyler Murray would be our quarterback if we wanted to play him. We strongly recommend that you use at least 2 of his teammates as a pass catcher stack. So that could be Marquise Brown, the wide receiver 1. That could be Rondale Moore in there. That could be Juju Smith-Schuster from Kansas City coming back. Whatever players you choose, this is the framework for a lineup that we strongly recommend that you stick to in high-risk contests. In smaller entry stuff, think satellite contests, leagues with 500 or less users, really 100 or less users. You can actually even go with 3x2 stacks. So if you wanted to play this Kansas City and Arizona game this week, for example, you could play a couple of Chiefs in here with your 3 Arizona Cardinals if you were going with this build, and that would be acceptable. We have found that that works fairly well in smaller contests especially. Now, one other big tip in your high-risk lineups Now, one other thing we want you to keep in mind in high-risk contests, you absolutely want to play one player that is projected to be owned by less than 10% of the field. Again, going over to the Occupy model, we have the ownership projections for you. You typically can check a wide receiver or a running back that you like, see what their ownership will be, and that can help you decide if you've met that criteria by selecting a player. So this week we like someone like, let's say, Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions would meet the criteria. He would be under 10%. That would get us at least one player under 10% in one of our high-risk lineups. That is a quick overview of NFL DFS strategy. For more, always make sure that you're checking out the daily plug that we post at OccupyFantasy.com. We have those not just for these classic slates, but every single primetime showdown slate now. We're offering a Thursday night showdown slate. We had that last night for the Bills and the Rams game. We'll have one for Sunday night football between the Cowboys and the Buccaneers this weekend, and Monday night football between the Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks. And we'll do that all season long right up through the Super Bowl. So I hope you're looking forward to that. Week 1. Other than Kyler Murray, who obviously we started by talking about, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. How are injuries going to shape the slate? There are a couple of spots that I'm most interested in at the running back position. The first, unfortunately, is the situation where Washington Commanders rookie Brian Robinson will be unable to play because he suffered some gunshot wounds in an assault recently. That puts Antonio Gibson back into a near every down role. We actually have him as the 4th highest ranked running back available on DraftKings here in week 1, and I believe the 3rd highest ranked running back over on FanDuel. He's really cheap this week. $5,800 over on DraftKings, $6,800 over on FanDuel, just $18 for those of you playing on Yahoo. We have the ownership projections fairly low for Gibson here on Thursday evening, Friday morning, but suspect that by Sunday, when people start taking the slate a little more seriously, this number will creep up a little bit. We're looking at a role where Gibson probably will see 15 to 17 carries and hopefully 2 to 4 targets in the passing game against the Jaguars from Carson Wentz. So Gibson becomes an extremely strong play at this medium price on week 1 contests for really all lineup types. Another injury spot that we're really interested in monitoring here up through Sunday is the Baltimore Ravens running back room. Gus Edwards is already out for week 1. We're not expecting J.K. Dobbins to be available on Sunday. Lamar Jackson even said in one of his pressers this week that they're hoping to get Dobbins back within a couple of weeks. So that is a pretty good indicator that Dobbins will not be available to us. So without Dobbins available, that means one of Kenyon Drake, who just came over to Baltimore from the Raiders, and Mike Davis, who signed with this team before the preseason even happened, they both become kind of interesting here if that materializes. Now, we're going to have to keep an eye on the news, but we think right now Mike Davis probably has the edge in week 1. Most of the team beat reporters seem to feel this way, but we're not going to be able to project it this way until we get explicit confirmation that J.K. Dobbins is out. So if that has happened by the time you're watching this video, then you'll know our plug has been updated, our model has been updated, and you'll probably see Mike Davis and or Kenyon Drake ranked very highly in the Occupy model. We'll want to play a running back like this. Davis and Baltimore in particular stands out because we like to focus on playing running backs that are on highly favored teams, especially in our low-risk contests. Baltimore is one of 3 teams that are favored by a touchdown in betting markets this week. The Ravens, the Colts, and the 49ers are each favored by a touchdown in their games this weekend. That means we're not interested in just Davis as a big favorite, especially as a value play if it goes that way. But we also should be considering Jonathan Taylor, big favorite against the Houston Texans. We should at least be passively interested in Elijah Mitchell, who has been in bubble wrap for the 49ers throughout the preseason, but he's not on the early version of the injury reports for this week 1 game against the Bears, and he has been their RB1 when healthy for the better part of the last year, so I would expect the same thing here. Now, the Cincinnati Bengals are favored by 6.5 points this weekend, so that means that Joe Mixon should at least be somewhat appetizing to us to consider. And also, Kansas City Chiefs, favored by 6 in the 54-point total game against the Arizona Cardinals, highest total game on the slate. This is a backfield that I think most people don't want any part of in fantasy football, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, expected to be the top dog here in the backfield, becomes interesting in this type of game environment for sure. Our model outside of these highly favored running backs this week is extremely interested in Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans. He was on pace for over 400 carries before getting hurt last year, so we're probably always going to be ranking him highly while he's available for the Titans this season. DeAndre Swift with the Detroit Lions with his very strong passing game and running game role. A role that is very similar to Alvin Kamara's with the Saints, another running back that we really like in the model this week. And then Austin Eckler in a high total game against the Las Vegas Raiders. These are some of the other top running backs I think are worth considering in DFS in week 1. The highest total games in week 1 are the Kansas City Chiefs and the Arizona Cardinals. They're playing in a 54-point total environment. We have the Chargers and the Raiders playing in a 52-point environment. Both of these games go off at 4:25 p.m., latest games on the main slate, and they're probably going to carry a significant amount of the ownership in tournaments in week 1. With already talked a little bit about Kyler Murray, it's certainly going to be very easy, I would say, to also stack Patrick Mahomes. The most expensive wide receiver is Juju Smith-Schuster. He's just $5,200. Travis Kelce, I think most people will just play him if they're going to stack the Chiefs here, and his price is even kind of low compared to what it has been historically for himself. So that's certainly doable. We have the Raiders and the Chargers. I do think this is another game worth stacking this week, and our model certainly agrees because we have Derek Carr and Justin Herbert as the number 2 and number 4 quarterbacks in the model respectively this week. When you read the week 1 plug at OccupyFantasy.com this week for Sunday's main slate, we're going to strongly advocate that you stack the Arizona-Kansas City game and the Los Angeles Chargers-Las Vegas Raiders game. These games carry 4 of our top 5 rated quarterbacks of the weekend, so we're not looking to get too cute here. We're going to be playing the quarterbacks from the highest total games on the slate, and we're going to be stacking them in our DFS lineups. We're going to be using the NFL DFS strategy guide that we have and building our lineups accordingly for the type of contests that we're playing with the players from those games. Now, talked a lot about the quarterbacks, the running backs, game stacks. What wide receivers should you consider if you're building a lineup this week? I would stick to wide receivers from these high total offenses, but there are a couple of spots I think you will see people get really excited about, particularly in low-risk contests as value plays. The first of which I think you should be aware of before you build any lineups this weekend. Another 4:25 p.m. game. It's the wide receiver room with the New York Giants. They're fairly injured heading into the beginning of the season. They got pretty banged up during the preseason, and one of their top receivers just hasn't looked very good for the better part of the last year and a half in Kenny Golladay. I think this is a really big spot for Kadarius Toney, the second-year wide receiver. I think he'll be a pretty popular, cheap wide receiver, and maybe even Wan'Dale Robinson, their rookie that they picked early in the 2022 draft this year, will probably be someone that ends up sneaking into a few low-risk lineups for people for sure. But other guys that I think are just screaming values on this week's slate, everybody's cheap. You can play whoever you want, but it's that main receiver for Arizona this week. Marquise Brown had a huge target and air yard role with the Ravens in 2021. He'll slide right into wide receiver 1 role here with Kyler Murray, his college teammate at Oklahoma, to begin the season. I think Michael Thomas, as long as he's full go, is well worth considering as well at just $5,700 here on DraftKings. Another interesting play in low-risk contests. And of course, the new presumptive wide receiver 1 for the Kansas City Chiefs without Tyreek Hill in town, Juju Smith-Schuster at $5,200, should be on our radar as well. These are some of the guys that I think are some of the best plays in low-risk contests at wide receiver. Let's recap what we went over here today. I went over some of the principles to building low-risk and high-risk lineups in NFL DFS. You can always review the free NFL DFS strategy guide at OccupyFantasy.com, where that information will live and be there for you any single time you want to review it. Highly recommend that you do that. In low-risk lineups, we like playing quarterbacks that have rushing upside. This week, our favorite in the Occupy model is Kyler Murray. However, guys like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and even Trey Lance in a low-total game against the Bears should be on your radar as well for that. At the running back position, we want to focus on playing favorites, guys that have large roles, projected for a lot of touches, projected for high ownership in DFS, and also playing for teams that should win their games. They should score a lot of fantasy points. Thankfully, Jonathan Taylor with the Colts does fit that mold. There are a couple of other guys I talked about, Joe Mixon with the Bengals, Elijah Mitchell with the San Francisco 49ers. However, there are also a couple of value plays at running back that I think are important to play this week, and that would be Antonio Gibson with the Washington Commanders. And should we get confirmation that J.K. Dobbins is out in week 1, I do think Mike Davis with the Baltimore Ravens would be the other running back that I want to play in low risk this week especially. I have a couple of cheap defenses that we like this week at the top of the Occupy model. One is the Miami Dolphins. They're actually the number 1 defense in the Occupy model against the Patriots. They're favored by 3.5 points for their home opener. So I like when we can play a cheap defense and just pay up at other positions for more talented players. So that's what I'm going to try to do this week. If this were a high-risk lineup, you would want to stack at least 2 teammates with Kyler Murray and bring back 1 opponent. So I have a lot of interest in Zach Ertz at tight end, takes care of this gross position. I have a lot of interest in Marquise Brown as the number 1, what I believe will be the number 1 pass game option for the Arizona Cardinals in week 1. And if you wanted to build a true 3-1 stack here, you could use Juju Smith-Schuster with the Kansas City Chiefs to make this a 3-1 for your high-risk lineup. Leaves you $5,100 to fill out your final wide receiver position here in week 1. I think that's plenty of room to do something here. This is going to be a fun season. We have a lot of things planned for you here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. You're going to get a slate preview video for every single primetime showdown slate from Occupy Fantasy co-founder, CEO Brian Jester, who is also a $1 million winner in DraftKings showdown contests. You're going to get primetime showdown plugs for each of those games as well. You're going to get these NFL classic slate plugs for Sunday afternoons every single Friday evening. We're going to have a members-only Sunday slate contest every single week. So if you're a member of our website over at OccupyFantasy.com, you will be able to see the link to our free DraftKings League for Occupy Fantasy members. Every single Sunday, there will be a $100 cash prize from us to the winner of that contest weekly. So that's just one more reason to consider subscribing, not just to our YouTube channel, but to our website for our full content. Please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. That's when you'll know when we have all of these great things coming out for you. We'd really appreciate it. We know that about 60% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to our channel. We appreciate you watching anyways, of course, but if you want to know the very second we have something new for you and you like this content, that's the best way for you to find out that we have it for you. So please consider doing that. We will be here for the entire ride, and we're looking forward to seeing some of you win some big contests this year.